Hello and welcome to the Nightmare Vault. And today we'll be looking at the Harbinger Experiment, which I am so fucking pumped to cover. Let's go!
Yeah, I do think this one, at least in our talks, has probably gone back to episode 1 of one to explore eventually. And we're finally here.
Actually, I think I was debating whether or not to do the Russian sleep experiment or this one first.
Yeah, so I guess this will be our longest story.
By far.
So yeah, by far and so far.
I think actually the story alone would probably eclipse the runtime of our longest Nightmare Vault video yet, which would be covering, the original Just the Killer story and the reboot.
I think so. I think, this will definitely eclipse that, even though that was, two separate stories with two separate discussions. This will just be the one story with the one
I was about to say, how long was it? I think it was a bit over an hour, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was.
I think it was just shy of 2 hours.
That's what I was about to say. I think
the story is about shy of 2 hours. Well, it's probably going to work out to that, much less the talking we're going to have at the end, which, oh boy, there's probably going to be a lot to break down.
There definitely will be. So as usual, this is a story that I am going into completely blind, but one that Briggsy is very familiar with. So is there anything that you want to preempt me with, or...
No, I'd rather kind of let the story speak for itself, but usually when I want to go back and revisit some old creepypastas, I usually start off with watching the video that I discovered that exposed me to this creepypasta. And I always go to that first before branching off and revisiting some of the others, so it's kind of one that I kind of revisit often, although actually it's been a good while since I've revisited creepypastas. Well, I guess technically we're revisiting them here, so I guess that's a fucking lie.
Yeah, I guess in a different fashion. There's a difference between, sort of doing it leisurely and then having to do it as part of still fun, but also a bit of work at the same time.
Oh, yeah. I would say you got to work hard to play hard.
I guess so.
Oh, so credits says what? Is Zion?
Zion, or Zon.
Zon?
Yeah.
Zon?
Zon.
Zon.
Yeah, Zon J.
Fuck it, let's go Zion J unless he wants to come out and correct us.
Yeah.
That little tension out of the way. Let's get back to the story. The world we live in is full of things we don't understand. Being the curious humans that we are, we naturally try and seek these things out. Doing so has led us to remarkable discoveries and inventions that we never could have imagined 100 years ago. We have defeated diseases, built to the sky itself, and even created machines that could take us beyond the clouds and into the stars. If our ancestors could see us and what we have created, I'm sure many of them would see us as gods. Our innate curiosity and lust for knowledge has not always led us to greatness, however. True evil and darkness have also been uncovered in humanity's conquest of knowledge, and in the end, I fear this evil will be our doom. I do not say this from the standpoint of a great philosopher who has sat and simply pondered things either. No, I say this because I have seen it, experienced it. I was a part of it. The event I'm about to relay to you is true in its entirety. This, I swear, I feel certain that this will fall on deaf ears, and many of you will believe this just to be another spooky story meant to give you cheap thrills. But I promise you that this is neither my intent nor my purpose. The purpose of this story is to simply warn you of what lurks beyond the veil of what we can see and understand, to show you what awaits us in the darkness, even if I myself don't understand it. What I am about to tell you has happened, and I feel certain it will happen again. In 1971, a not so well known scientist began preparations for an extremely sensitive project known simply as the Harbinger Experiment. I would like to keep the identity of the scientist a secret for personal reasons, so throughout this recounting I will refer to him as Zimmerman. Zimmerman's background is unclear at best beyond 1971. All that is known about him before that time is that he'd grown up somewhere in Maryland with a strange fascination of the occult and supernatural. This later made him an outcast among his fellow scientists due to how scoffed upon the metaphysical was and still is at the time. Zimmerman's opinions concerning the otherworldly were not the sole cause for him being an outcast though. It was his methods that made him widely unaccepted among his peers. Zimmerman was well known during his time for being ruthless and cold beyond measure. He never cared about the means, all that mattered to him was results. And if he predicted the results to be valuable enough, anything would be worth attaining them. It was the insatiable and brutal lust for the truth that made him feared among those that knew of him. And the few that knew of him and did not fear him believed in him and followed him and his work closely. The word Harbinger itself has such a mysterious and intimidating taste to it. Maybe it's the way it rolls from our tongues, or maybe it's simply due to its association with the project. But the word always seemed to carry a certain amount of doom with it, which would make sense. The word itself means to warn or forebode. I can't imagine Zimmerman's reasons for giving the experiment this title, but in retrospect, it fits perfectly. Zimmerman came to a select few, me being one of them. He told us he was working on something big and that he needed people who could keep confidentiality and not spread idle gossip of his work. While he did not fully trust some of us, he did know that we were professionals and that for some reason or another, we were all in dire need of employment. I had worked at the local clinic as a doctor, but I was caught stealing medication and was promptly fired. This left a very dark mark on my resume, so work was hard to find. I was also a native to Alaska and lived near where the experiment would take place, so I guess you could say I was a convenient choice. As you can imagine, I jumped at the opportunity. It was hard not to when I saw the payout. 15 of us were hired in total. Some were colleagues of his that had been working with him for a while. Some were maintenance workers, and a few were hired as private security. I was the only medical professional to be hired. It is still a wonder to me how he even attained the funds necessary for the experiment. I would not be wholly surprised if his financing was not entirely legal. But legal or not, I needed the money and he was paying. Looking back, it's a decision I have come to regret. After Zimmerman attained his money, he used it to buy a relatively large plot of land deep in the frozen wilderness of Alaska. And upon that piece of land, Zimmerman built a concrete structure not dissimilar to a bunker, in fact. The sole difference being that its goal was to keep any potential damage contained within the structure, rather than keeping it out, as he put it. Most of the structure dug underneath the earth, which had the effect of making the underground complex seem so much smaller than it really was from the outside, as would be expected. There was only one way of entering and leaving the underground structure, and it was via a ladder that led from a small, unassuming concrete building on the surface, which I will refer to from now on as the entrance building for convenience, to the network below. After everyone had gone to bed at night, the hatch that contained the ladder would be sealed off with a very large and thick metal lid. Zimmerman was very strict about this. Located not too far away from the entrance building was a series of wooden cabins that would serve as the sleeping quarters for the staff Zimmerman had hired. Compared to the entrance building standing on the surface, the underground system was massive. At the center of the complex was the control room. This is where all the facilities, electronics and such were linked to. This included security cameras, lights and door controls. Consoles, monitors and computers lined the walls of this large central chamber. This is also where the ladder in the entrance building connected to in the underground complex. Connected to the control room were 3 doors. One led to a smaller room that served as the infirmary. Another door led to a break room, and the last door led into the hallways. The hallways are where the complex began to feel extremely eerie. They were, for some reason, laid out in extremely confusing schemes that led in circles and to complete dead ends. These hallways made up a vast majority of the complex, and it would be very easy to get lost in the maze if you were unfamiliar with the complex. But if you knew where you were going, you would find yourself standing before one of the 3 8x8 foot rooms before long. Each room had a camera hooked up to one of the corners of the room, and all 3 of these cameras were connected to a corresponding monitor in the control room. Cameras were also scattered throughout the hallways so that whoever was watching their corresponding monitor could see anywhere they wanted to, when they wanted to. Thick metal doors stood at the entrance to each of these 8x8 foot rooms, and in order to open them, you would have to enter a 4-digit code into a panel located near the door. I remember when I first arrived at the complex how badly the hallways frightened me. I have always been claustrophobic, you see, and those hallways were so very narrow. The noise, or more accurately the lack of noise, was also a tremendous source of fear for me in those bleak, narrow hallways. It was always so unnaturally silent, as if the entire world had stopped moving. It really made you feel like you were trapped down there. Thankfully though, I only rarely ventured into those hallways, for I was the only medical professional in the facility and I had virtually no reason to go into them. In the beginning, I found it so peculiar that Zimmerman would ask for a medical professional like me on a project like this, but by the time it was all over, I understood why. The official purpose of the Harbinger Experiment was to test and observe the effects of extended isolation on the human mind. This is what was listed on reports being sent out at least. But unbeknownst to all those who are not participating in the project, excluding the subjects, the true purpose was much darker. Like I said before, Zimmerman had always had an obsession with the occult and supernatural. He sought to prove himself to those who did not believe in him. He wanted physical proof that the supernatural was a real phenomenon, and he wanted to be the first one to attain said proof. The true purpose of the Harbinger Experiment was to find proof of the metaphysical, a world we could not see. The thought of doing this was naturally a tad bit daunting and even scary, but it was Zimmerman's methods of doing so that were truly terrifying. Zimmerman believed that he would be able to open a portal between worlds momentarily, allowing 3 random entities to cross over to our world, and each one of these beings would be trapped within one of the 3 rooms. Zimmerman had the theory that any entity would try and latch onto the nearest living thing that had the capacity for it. He wanted to use this technique to trap a spirit in a physical form by allowing it to enter a living being that had been injected with a compound mixture of Zimmerman's creation. In theory, this compound would keep the entity from simply leaving whatever it was attached to. The only way it would be able to leave a host who had been injected with the compound was through death. According to Zimmerman, the host would have to be something living with a will strong enough to survive the possession, and there is only one known species that possesses the amount of will required for this: humans. Zimmerman had also done something to ensure that the entities would only enter the 3 rooms, and that there would only be one entity in each room, although I cannot say I know what exactly he did. In fact, I know next to nothing when it comes to how Zimmerman managed to do what he did. He liked to keep his methodology a secret to his most trusted colleagues, most likely due to his paranoia that someone would steal his ideas and take credit for the success of said ideas. If I had known that this was the true purpose before I signed up, I may have reconsidered, But Zimmerman decided not to tell us until we all gathered at his fortress. Even if any of us wanted to leave, I doubt we would have been allowed to do so. The security team Zimmerman had hired was loyal to him, and the payout, it is not likely that Zimmerman had given them the order to now allow anyone to leave. There were 3 different subjects included in the experiment. All were native to Alaska, and each one was lured into the project under the belief that they would be participating in a harmless study of the effect of isolation on the human mind. As I mentioned before, which is why none of the subjects objected when they realized that they would be confined to one of the 3 rooms that I mentioned earlier. The first subject was a younger man. He was apparently out of work and desperately needed the money that had been offered for participating in the study. The second was a woman. I could tell she was an addict of some sort. The third and final subject was an older man, a drifter if I had to guess. One thing that they had all in common was that none of them had any family or friends left. In short, no one would miss them, which is why they were chosen for the project. I am sorry. I wish I could supply more information about the subjects, but all of this has been drawn from my memory, and I was given little information on the 3 to begin with. The experiment did not officially begin until 1987, 16 years after its original announcement. I was eager to begin, so I packed up and headed out to the complex as soon as I could. I arrived at the compound a week before the test subjects had even signed up, and a whole month before the project even began. I was not the first to arrive by any means. When I got there, Zimmerman, his colleagues, and the security team had already arrived. I suppose you could say I was among the people Zimmerman did not trust to arrive first. Everyone had arrived about a week before the experiment began. There was a noticeable rift between those who were there simply for the money, like me, and those who were followers of Zimmerman. On October 15th, 1987, all the preparations were in place. The subjects had been sealed in their rooms. The cameras, lights, and speakers were fully operational, and all the staff members had settled in. The time had come for the experiment to officially begin. Zimmerman asked everyone to report to the control room around 9 p.m. to witness the beginning of the experiment. He wanted everyone to be present when he proved that all his theories had been correct, and that he was not just a madman. He wanted us all to see the fruits of his labour. When everyone had finally gathered in the large control room, Zimmerman turned to us and simply said, "Observe." He then turned his back to us, leaning into the microphone that would project his voice through the 3 rooms, and then he began chanting in a strange language that I feel certain no one but Zimmerman could understand. We all observed the 3 large monitors on the wall, silently waiting for something to happen. The subjects all stood in their room, dumbstruck by Zimmerman's chanting, staring at the monitors with confused expressions on their face. After about 5 minutes, I felt something awful. I cannot explain what exactly it was, but a horrible feeling of dread washed over me, riddling me with fear. It was then that the ground actually began to shake subtly and the lights began to flicker. Zimmerman continued chanting into the microphone as if nothing was off or wrong, while the subjects began dashing around their rooms, screaming for help. Then suddenly, the ground stopped shaking and the monitor's image turned into static. The air began to become very heavy as we all stared at the monitors, waiting for them to regain their image and show us what was happening or had happened in those 3 rooms. For a while, all was silent, but then there was screaming. The screams of a woman going through unbearable pain and terror began to echo throughout the compound. The similar screams of men began to coincide with the woman's terrified screams, and together they mixed into an awful symphony of pain and fear that beat mercilessly into our ears. Those of us who were here for the money began to give each other scared looks, while those loyal to Zimmerman seemed completely unfazed. We wanted to leave and never come back to this awful place, but we all knew deep down that Zimmerman would never allow that to happen. We were here for the long haul. There was no escape. It was 10:13 p.m. when the screaming finally stopped. The monitors had yet to reveal to us what had occurred in those 3 rooms. As soon as the screaming ended, Zimmerman stood there and dismissed us all for the night, adding that we were all forbidden to come back into the compound until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning. Not like any of us wanted to. We all solemnly made our way out of the compound and towards the cabins and settled in for the night. I feel it is safe to say that not all of us slept well that night, and I was not one of them. The following morning, all the staff had arrived at the entrance building. We all stood inside exchanging tired or nervous looks as we waited for Zimmerman to arrive and open the hatch that concealed the ladder. I could see palpable fear in the eyes of some of us, while others did not seem to have been even remotely affected by what happened last night. Zimmerman showed up 5 minutes after 10, apologizing for his tardiness as he came through the door of the entrance building. He opened the hatch and without any hesitation began descending the ladder downwards into the black abyss. He almost seemed enthusiastic. I was the first to follow behind Zimmerman's dark descent into the facility. It seemed that the further I climbed down, the more the darkness closed in on me, as if it was trying to swallow me whole. And as I climbed deeper, I couldn't help but feel that this place was different somehow. While before there was only the unsettling concrete hallways and rooms, now there was something else. Something made the eeriness feel so real and personified. I felt like a horrible and gruesome scene awaited us down there, but I continued climbing downward. Despite my fear and my hesitation, this was no longer just a spooky bunker. There was darkness and malevolence in the air. A true evil now lived here, and I could feel it. We all could. I finally felt my foot touch ground and let out a silent sigh of relief to be on solid ground. Almost as if on cue, the light bulbs came alive, dousing the room in their warm and welcome light. Zimmerman must have turned on the power, I thought. I allowed myself to take a couple of seconds to examine the control room. It was exactly as if he had left it last night, for which I gave a silent and thankful prayer. It was almost as if nothing unusual had happened. It was almost as if nothing unusual had ever happened. I shook myself from my thoughts as I remembered the static-filled monitors from the night before. I let my eyes slowly make their way towards the monitors on the wall, anticipating the grim and fearful scenes that would be on them. My attention was first grabbed by Monitor 1 and 3, which were still pure static. It would have been a small relief, but then the motionless image on Monitor 2 caught my eye. Room 2 was entirely still and everything seemed entirely untouched. I couldn't help but gasp as I noticed the only thing that was different, the woman laying in the center of the small concrete room. An expression of fear and terror was frozen into her gaunt face as she lay silent and lifeless on her back. Zimmerman's expression turned angry when he saw this. He ordered that second monitor be turned off, and it was. We didn't ask why. It's not like any of us wanted to see the dreadful scene any longer. He also ordered that if the images in monitors 1 and 3 did not return within the next 2 hours, the security team would be sent to investigate the rooms. The security team nodded at hearing this. They made it seem as if they had no fear, but I could see it in their eyes. The subtly loud tick-tock of the clock was the only sound that echoed throughout the control room while I stared at the monitors. An hour and 50 minutes had gone by, and static was still all that occupied Monitor 1 and 3. All of the other staff members were working, except me. This was due to the fact that the project had been completely injury-free thus far, so I essentially had nothing to do but wait for someone to hurt themselves. Zimmerman, a couple of his colleagues, and I were the only ones that occupied the room. They quietly chatted amongst each other on the other side of the room. while I spent my time reading and pondering the situation I currently found myself in. I had clearly made a mistake coming here. The corpse lying in room 2 was evidence enough of this, and God only knew what awaited us in rooms 1 and 3. My thoughts were soon interrupted as Monitor 3's image returned. The clear image now displayed on the screen made everyone's eyes noticeably widen. What was displayed on the monitor was horrifying. A humanoid thing stood in the center of the room, staring directly at the camera, unmoving. It was wearing the jumpsuit that Subject 3 had been issued, but this clearly was not the same man that had entered the room. What caught my attention first was its eyes. They were solid, black, and twice the size of normal human eyes. They seemed so endless and so cold. Its head had also grown with the eyes in such a symmetrical and unsettling manner. The being had also shed all the hair it once had, and even from the monitor, I could see how unnaturally smooth and clear its skin was. It had also seemingly grown in height and stature, which could be seen in the fact that the jumpsuit was now obviously far too small for its wearer. Its limbs had grown specially long. Its arms hung almost as low as the creature's knees. What we were looking at was in no way the same man we had sent inside. Fear was all I felt as I continued to stare into the monitor at the thing in the room. And my fear seemed to be shared by those around me, which made me feel kind of good. It may have sounded awful, but it was a bit satisfying to see that Zimmerman and his colleagues could feel fear too. But at the same time, it was worrying because this showed that this was not part of Zimmerman's plan. Something had gone wrong. We all stared into the monitor at the thing. Despite our fear, it was almost as if we were in a trance. My already present fear began to grow and spread rapidly through my body as I became lost in the creature's eyes, trapped in its terrifyingly hypnotic gaze. After what felt like forever, I managed to break eye contact with the creature and diverted my attention from the monitor. And when I did so, I felt my fear levels drop considerably. After a short while, Zimmerman ordered his security team to make their way to Subject 1's door just as he said he would do. The security team left without question, armed only with batons and pistols. I focused my attention on watching the men's progress through the hallways towards Subject 1's room via the cameras. Even through the not so high quality cameras, it wasn't hard to tell that these men were afraid of what awaited them. Their heads were downcast as they walked. They did not possess the same confidence with them that they did when this project began. They looked like scared boys being sent off to a terrible war. Eventually, they made it to the door. We had perfect vision of them and the door via the hallway camera. One of them said something through one of their walkie-talkies and made a motion towards the camera. In response, one of Zimmerman's colleagues buzzed the door open. The men already had their pistols out by the time the button was pushed. Slowly, the door began to open. We all watched eagerly as the men began to approach the door, guns aimed inside. Suddenly, and without warning, there was a loud shriek. And as something bounded out of the room at the men, the monitor turned into static. Immediately, we could hear screaming echoing down the hallways, followed shortly after by the distinct sound of gunshots. We could do nothing but wait. After a couple minutes, the screaming and gunshots stopped. We all waited and prayed, hoping that whatever bounded at them from the room would not be the one to return to the control room. After a couple more minutes, 3 of the men came back, carrying with them the corpse of the 4th. He had massive cuts covering his chest, and his face was shredded. You couldn't even tell who he was anymore, or even that he was human. I was used to gore, being a doctor and all, so I felt somewhat unfazed by the mass of shredded flesh and bloodied meat they carried with them. But many of the others went pale and vomited. The security team all wore a motionless expression and eyes filled with terror. One of the men finally looked up at us. He stared at us for a while with those wide eyes of his. "It's dead," he finally managed to mutter in a shaken and scared voice. A couple hours went by. The dead man's name was Frank. He was buried outside in the cold Alaskan ground. 2 of the men were unharmed, physically, at least. The third was alive, but only barely. His body was covered in bloody slashes, and one of his eyes had been gouged out. I managed to stabilize him, but only just. The other 2 men vaguely explained what happened. Apparently, Subject 1 leaped out at Frank after the door had opened. Only it wasn't really Subject 1 anymore. According to them, it had a hideously contorted face and long sharp claws. They claimed to have shot it over a dozen times before it fell dead, and then they emptied another dozen bullets into it just to be sure it was really dead. Only once it was dead did they come back. After tending to the wounded man, I went to investigate the monitors. As afraid as I was of seeing what those monitors may have held, I needed to see. Subject 3 was the only one left now, and I needed to see it and make sure the creature was still in his room. It seemed to be more like a jail cell than an ordinary room at this point though, which was probably a good thing. The camera displaying Subject 1's room and the hallway outside it still displayed a static-filled screen. No one was sent to repair them or investigate. We just had to hope that Subject 1 was well and truly dead. Monitor 3's image was exactly the same as I had left it. Subject 3 was still staring directly into the camera at us. He was still in the exact same position, and if it were not for the small fan in the corner of the room, I would think I was looking at a still image. In a way, I felt relieved at seeing this, relief that he was still in his room and had not escaped while no one was looking. After everything quieted down, I noticed something especially unusual. There were a strange sound emanating from somewhere. At first, it was barely noticeable. The only reason I heard it was because of how extremely quiet it was in the infirmary. But as time went by, it slowly began to increase in volume. After about an hour, it was loud enough that everyone else could hear it too. And after a couple more hours, its volume had increased so much that we could determine what the noise was. It was a song. One of the staff members identified it as "Living in the Sunlight" by Tiny Tim. Apparently his father loved the song and listened to it frequently. The song seemed to be on loop and kept replaying itself. Although we were able to identify the noise, we remained unable to identify its source. We knew that it wasn't coming from the speakers because we had turned them off. It seemed to be emitting from the walls themselves. More time ticked by as we all began to become increasingly agitated by the song. I spent most of my time in the infirmary attending to Frank or in the control room. Fear hung in the air, and the presence of the unmistakable darkness and evil was no doubt its source. Subject 3 still had not moved. He had kept his unblinking gaze fixed on the camera the entire time. It always felt like he was staring directly at me, no matter where I was in the room. I think this effect was also felt by the others due to the fact they seemed to move around the room a lot, and for seemingly no reason. After a few hours, the song was so loud that people almost had to shout in order to communicate. We had been trying to find its source so that we could turn the song off, but it was to no avail. The source was completely unidentifiable. This added a level of extreme irritation to our already very present fear. It was around 8:30 that the ground itself began to shake once again, just as it had done the previous night. Panic began to spread among my fellow employees and me as the shaking grew in intensity. During this, I had the sudden instinctual feeling to look over at subject freeze monitor. It was gone, almost as if on cue, the power went out, and thankfully the song did as well. Ever since the security team came back, panic had been slowly building up among the staff, and Zimmerman was powerless to stop it. When those lights went out, the calm projections that everyone had begun trying to maintain left us, and the fear in all our hearts took over. The emergency backup lights kicked on shortly after the power went out, which I gave myself a silent, thankful prayer for. The lights were dim, but they still allowed me to see a lot. Total panic seized us, as many of my fellow staff members began screaming and rushing to the ladder in an attempt to escape. But too many were trying to use it at once, and no one was able to get very far on the level without someone else pulling them to the floor and taking their place. Zimmerman was shouting for everyone to calm down, but his dominating and intimidating personality had no effect here, and his demands fell upon deaf ears. It was total chaos. It wasn't long until people actually started hurting each other in their desperate attempts to get up that ladder and out of this place. I could only stand against the wall and wait for my opportunity to escape up the ladder. All the screams were soon silenced as the familiar hum of that unsettling song began to rise in volume again, only much quicker this time. And this time it was clear that the noise was coming directly from the maze-like corridors. People stopped fighting and shouting as all our attention shifted to the door that led into the hallways. The song quickly got louder than it had ever been before, which forced many of us to cover our ears with our hands in an attempt to silence the noise. Then suddenly, the song just completely stopped. Silence. That was all that filled the room, as we all stared at the thick metal door in anticipation for what was coming, and felt like ages had gone by, but in reality it was probably only seconds before the silence was broken. The door suddenly and violently burst open, and the music started again, louder than it had ever been before. The suddenness and the volume of this caused many of us to recoil by falling to the ground and grabbing our ears in an attempt to block out the noise. I glanced up for just a second, and in the doorway stood a tall, smooth-skinned figure with long limbs and eyes so dark and malevolent that you could clearly see them in the dim lighting. After I got my bearings, I looked up at the creature once again, just in time to see the thing pick up and rip Zimmerman in half in one fluid movement, dousing the room and everyone in it with his blood, intestines, and organs. I was no stranger to gore, but the sight of that was too much for me to bear. I hunched over immediately after seeing this and vomited all over the cold cement floor. That ladder is my only hope of survival, I thought to myself as I forced myself to a standing position. And as my eyes rose along with the rest of me, I could see the thing ripping and tearing through the people as they scattered in an attempt to escape it. It was distracted, and as awful as it sounds, this was my only chance to get up that ladder. I forced my legs to move towards the ladder, trying to block out the terrified screams of my fellow staff members and the unbearably loud music. I could hear gunshots coinciding with the screams and terrible sounds of flesh being ripped apart somewhere in the mess of noise. I reached my hands outwards and felt a wave of relief wash over me as my fingers came into contact with the hard metal rungs of the ladder. I gripped them and began to climb upwards as quickly as I could in my disorientated state, all the while praying that the monster would not see me and pull me off the ladder and back into the slaughter. It felt like at any moment I would feel one of its smooth hands wrap around my ankles and pull me to my death, but I eventually made it to the top. There was no question in my mind I had to close the hatch and seal that thing down there, even if it meant certain death for my colleagues. I could not allow that thing to escape. I gripped the thick metal lid and began to push with all my might in an attempt to seal the underground complex off. Despite how dense and sturdy it was, the lid was surprisingly easy to move and did not take that very much effort to push it over the hatch. Even in my weakened state, in seconds the hatch was completely covered by the dense metal lid. I collapsed on my side and began to vomit some more as exhaustion overtook me. And as I lay there, I realised something aside from my laboured breaths. The only thing I could hear was the faint echo of that song from down below. I felt as though I would lose some more of my sanity if I continued to lay there and listen to that song, so I once again forced myself to my feet and began to make my way to the wooden lodge I had stayed in the previous night. It was where I had left my baggage and also where I had left the keys to my truck. Of the 15 staff members that took part in that forsaken experiment, I am the only one who survived. I have never returned to that awful place where all this happened, and I don't intend to. The project was very secretive, and Zimmerman was the only one who knew all the details of it. And as far as I know, no one is aware of my involvement aside from me. In fact, I am probably the only one who knows what the Harbinger Experiment truly was, let alone what actually happened. By now, you are probably wondering why I've told you all about something none of you should be aware of. Maybe you're expecting me to give you a speech about not messing with things you don't understand or something along those lines. I hope not, for I have no speech to give or lesson to impart. I began hearing a noise earlier today. Almost immediately, I recognized the noise as a very haunting and familiar song. I don't even try to trace it to its source. I knew it would be pointless, and as the day has progressed, the song has increased in volume. It's loud enough now that I can very clearly make out the lyrics. I am completely unable to escape Tiny Tim's voice. It has followed me everywhere I've gone. Subject 3 is coming for me, and I know my time left in this world is extremely limited now. I guess you could say that I just wanted to tell the tale of the Harbinger Experiment before it was lost forever. I hope that you will take some lesson from what I've recounted to you, but I think we both know you won't. Let's be honest, you don't believe a word of what I just told you, and I don't blame you. I wouldn't believe me if I were you. To you, this is nothing more than something to just get your cheap thrills from. You were probably mindlessly surfing the internet when you clicked a link and found yourself here, whoever here may be reading this story. And to be honest, I don't care if you believe me or not. Even if you do, it probably wouldn't stop you from trying to uncover the truth of a darkness that few of us have ever seen. It certainly never stops Zimmerman. If you want a lesson, look at what happened to him when he went seeking the truth. I pray that none of you will ever discover this truth. I pray that none of you ever have to see the evil I have seen. I hope you all get to live in ignorance of what lies beyond the veil of what we can understand. It's here now. I can feel its black eyes burning into me just as I could all those years ago. I am as much to blame as Zimmerman is for the monstrosity that is now free to roam the world. Even if I was not the one to create it, I am sorry. Please forgive me. Holy shit, that's the end of it. That took a bit of effort to record at the end there.
All right.
So I want to start with your thoughts on it because, well, I think you can see why I love the story.
Yeah. What some of the other creepypastas that we've covered kind of lack, this one definitely makes up for. That's not to say that it is perfect or that it couldn't use a little bit of editing to clean it up a bit.
I was about to say it could do with a little condensing.
Yeah, there's definitely moments where it kind of meanders, or there was one moment where it sort of like repeated pretty much the exact same line, like when he's talking about gore the second time, like he's seen gore before. It's like, you've just told us that you've seen gore before. So there's like little things like that just to clean it up. But I think the story in general, overall, is quite interesting. I think the really big payoff is, the fact that it doesn't end where you kind of think it's going to. Like I thought it was going to end pretty much as he, sort of like got out of the testing ground and sort of made his way to the cabin. But yeah, the fact that it sort of continues on and then like he explains like why he's telling the story, I think that's kind of the big thing that really saved it for me. Because I think that sort of happens quite a lot as well. It's sort of like in a lot of creepypastas is, it kind of leaves it on a weird ending that I guess you could say, leaves it open to interpretation, which sometimes is nice, but also, it feels a little bit lazy, where this does both of it very well, so it leaves it up to interpretation because, sort of subject 3 is still out there roaming and doing what, but it also, finishes off narrator's story, sort of his point of view, which I thought was really cool.
Actually, while you were talking there, I was doing a quick look to see if it's an actual song, and apparently it is.
Yeah.
An actual artist.
Yes.
I'm surprised I actually haven't looked into this earlier.
Yeah. So Tiny Tim is actually quite an interesting artist as well, because there's this whole subject or whole topic of outsider art, which kind of stems from the very early age of... It almost kind of stems from like sideshow sort of stuff from, old circuses and things like that. But then, into sort of like the modern age of a recording where now these sort of, I guess, what would have been sideshow characters of part of a circus are now sort of being put into the limelight. So, Tiny Tim's a really interesting one. There's a really good documentary out there on YouTube that covers the whole history of outsider music and art.
I'm just surprised that's taken me this long to actually really look into it.
Yeah. So and that's actually sort of like my one big question is, why Tiny Tim and why specifically that song? That's really my only sort of like big question, because I think you can really sort of leave everything else up to, the supernatural, which is a really good sort of way of, a really good out. But I wonder why that song specifically.
Well, again, wasn't subject for a bit of an older gentleman. So it could have been a song he liked when he was younger or something.
That was my thought as well.
Also, can we go back to the beginning where we have this rough description of subjects?
Yeah.
I think subject was the older man.
Because there's a bit of a time skip as well.
Oh, yeah.
Where it sort of, ends up being like, what was it, 15 years later?
16, if I remember correctly, which still that means, well, let's say he let the story out when the story was originally published. Well, he was able to evade the entity for quite a while.
Well, even before the entity is created, there's quite a big gap.
Oh, yeah. But I was just thinking, like, how long was the creature down there? Because, because that's one of my biggest questions is, like, how much time has passed since he escaped?
Yes. I was thinking that as well. That's one of my sort of smaller questions.
Well, they said the project started in like 16 years later. They wouldn't even really put it into early internet.
Very early internet, yeah.
So I'd say the likelihood of him getting the story out shortly after he escapes is very unlikely. I'd say that it had to be a bit like into the later 90s. So looking at almost like another 5 to 10 years on top from when he escaped, or that's my guesstimate.
Yes, I think that would make sense. At least, sort of somewhere between the mid-90s through to the...
early aughts.
Yeah.
Although I think at that point it kind of starts to push it.
Yes.
Although considering what it did to that door to get into the control room, I just don't think the hatch would have kept it at bay for that long.
Yeah, that's what I thought as well. Yeah, if it can smash through a pretty secure metal door very quickly, I assume that it can get through a hatch quite quickly as well. But then I guess doesn't really say how it's traveling and where our narrator gets to as well. So sort of how far maybe he thought, where he is at the time of writing this and sending it out. There's definitely some questions left.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Although I think overall it's definitely a pretty solid story. Even though, again, it can do with some improvements, but I think that's like basically everything. Hell, even if you were to probably talk to an artist about their magnum opus, it'd be like, okay, they would be like, I could have done this and this and this better.
Yeah. First letter with young man. Yeah, was apparently out of work.
Third and final shot was, yes, an older man, a drifter. So, yeah, could have just been a song the old man liked.
Yeah, I think so. I think that's probably the clearer answer to the question.
Okay, so the experiment didn't officially begin to 87. Okay.
Yeah, so 16 years after.
So that does actually put it closer to the 90s, which I guess makes it a little bit more plausible that he probably brought the story out sometime in the 90s. But even then, I just don't see the hatch keeping the creature at bay for really that long for it to be really feasible that he would get the story out there.
I guess it doesn't. Does the story mention where he's from? Because we know that the test is happening
In
somewhere.
Alaska.
Yeah, in Alaska.
I think he said he was from Alaska as well earlier on.
You know, it goes, a lot into, Zimmerman.
Although it does say that, he was, having a bit of trouble getting some work considering what he did.
Yeah, we were all in dire need of employment.
He was a native to the area, although I guess not native as in a native sense, but just native that he's, from there, local.
Yeah, born and raised, yeah.
I know Zimmerman would have brought a few colleagues with him, but I think most of the people there would have been just locals in the area. Because I think it makes a lot more sense to do that instead of hiring someone that's all the way in Texas to come out to Alaska.
Yeah, although it does seem like Zimmerman is the sort of person that is going to prey on the weak and needy, as it kind of sort of mentions. They were all in need of some money and work, so I wouldn't necessarily put it past him that he is picking people that he knows are going to be easy targets, and sort of subordinate as well.
Yeah, but if I was broke, I don't think I would unless he was paying up front, I wouldn't really be able to make, again, my way from Texas to Alaska.
Yeah, well, maybe he's,
Because this, again, back in the 80s, so, don't get me wrong, air tickets have gone down quite a bit, but I still think they would be a bit pricey to someone who's struggling for cash.
Maybe Zimmerman is paying the travel and other expenses as well. But yeah, it does seem like it leaves it up to,
again, interpretation.
Yeah.
I could swear that. Actually, I was about to say, can we use the find tool real quick and see all mentions of Alaska? Okay, so the subjects were native.
Yeah,
okay.
All the subjects were definitely native to Alaska.
So I wonder if I was just interpreting that to also mean him. Well, the person telling the story.
Yeah, I mean, it does say here, yeah, so I packed up and headed to the complex as soon as I could.
But that could mean he could have just been somewhere else in Alaska.
Exactly, yeah. I arrived at combat a week before subjects had even signed up, a whole month before the project even began. I was not the first to arrive. I got the colleagues' security team already arrived. Yeah, it doesn't say how long it takes him to get there.
Although I guess if someone in the comments knows a bit more or found something that we kind of missed, well, let us know. But I guess we should kind of all talk a bit more about the story and that.
Yeah. So I think just to, sort of wrap up that point that you're sort of making of if our narrator is, still in Alaska, the test subject 3 breaks out, it really shouldn't take, I guess if it's able to find him, if there's, say, some imprint, because, it's seen, you wouldn't think it would take, 10 years to track him down.
Even them, even let's go back to mainland the Earth. So let's say if the experiment happened in California and he moved all the way out to let's say Maine. Yeah. Even them, it still wouldn't take 10 years for it to find him. Yeah. It'd probably take a year or two at most for the entity to travel across the country.
Yes. Yeah.
Considering I think it is possible to actually, I think with modern infrastructure, it'd probably take less than a year or two to get there by foot.
Oh, yeah.
Even back in the 80s, it would still, again, be a year or two at most.
Yeah, and I guess we're sort of assuming that it can only travel by foot as well, that it doesn't have some sort of super strength or other ways of travel, sort of ethereally. So, yeah, if we're sort of just using a human walking speed and strength and stamina, you would assume that it would only be maximum 3 to 5 years sort of thing. And even then, so that sort of still only puts it very early 90s where...
Yeah, even if, let's say, you were all the way down in Florida, say if the character moved all the way down into Florida, that, again, wouldn't really change much. That would line up with, again, about the 5-year timeline.
Yeah. And then...
And that's assuming that, that it's not, constantly moving.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that it has to stop and feed and rest and whatever else. Yeah, it's sort of... So I think probably the timeline of things doesn't quite add up, particularly because the way that he sort of says you're probably just someone scrolling through the internet. I don't, not many people are really doing that early 90s. So yeah.
For someone just to be casually surfing the internet, that would have to be again, early to late aughts.
Yeah. Yes, for sure. So yeah, there's definitely...
I guess surfing the internet wasn't as time consuming back in the 90s as it would be. Well, I guess it would be because, dial-up.
Yeah. So it's even more... I guess you're not necessarily surfing the internet until sort of
I guess search engines, really.
Yeah, until really, the aughts. Yeah.
Although, I guess besides that aside, I think the story does hold up pretty well.
Yeah, there's plenty to it that is really interesting. There's, I do like the perspective that it's from, the doctor. That's kind of nice. I guess we're also assuming that, everyone inside died and that he is the only survivor.
Although we only know that because he made the assumption that he was the only one to make it out.
Exactly.
And that's also another possibility is that, although I'm not sure if the hatch can be opened from the inside by a human, but if it could, that meant another member could have made it out.
Yeah.
And also made it easier for the monster to get out too.
Yes, that as well. And then...
But then I guess that opens the door that there could have been multiple staff members that made it out.
There's that as well.
And the creature could have just saved him for last.
Yep. And what's not to say that, sort of Zimmerman was working for other people and that, it's... If it was able to, let's say, for instance, we'll assume that it's able to get information from the people that it kills, like it kind of has in the story, then if Zimmerman's working for others, then it's potentially tracking those people down as well. So yeah, there's plenty I think that this story can really expand on if you really dig deep.
Although I say that, but I think that would hurt the pacing to kind of explain all that.
Yes, yeah. It's a lot of exposition to go into.
Something pretty minor.
Yeah, I guess one of those things where visually you could put little hints and things here and there, but when it comes to the written form, to keep it sort of as simple as it does, but still give you quite a lot of info to work with.
That's kind of one of the beauties of working with a written form is that, you kind of don't want to over-explain things. You want to let the reader's mind do most of the heavy lifting for you.
Yeah.
So you just give them enough pieces to, think for them to think, for themselves and kind of come up with their own answers to certain questions.
Yeah, absolutely.
I say that, but then I'm probably the person that has a hard time doing that. Although I guess that's because I don't read as much as I would like to.
Yeah.
I definitely, when I do pick up something and read it, kind of enjoy it.
Yeah.
So I guess back to the story. I think, long story short, it's good. Although I think that's a bit oversimplifying.
Yeah.
Although I want to say, I guess you kind of talked about it a bit, but what works for you and what doesn't?
I really I think the setup and the pack down of the story is probably what works for me the best. Because, you get a little bit of context of how things started and why everything kind of has come to fruition in the way that it's going to. And then, you get this nice little wrap up of the guy explaining why he's doing it. So I think that's what really works for me. What doesn't work for me, I guess, would probably be because we do get so much information to prep us for what's about to happen. Some of that kind of then gets lost once all of the actual action is kind of happening. So yeah, it would have been nice to get a little bit more sort of character interaction between, some of the other scientists and things like that.
Oh yeah, I think that's one thing that I would like to kind of, if I was to do it, would improve upon was probably even though it would blow the runtime a bit of it.
Yeah.
Just having those scenes where, well, again, it's just not like what generic guy 1009.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like, okay, this is here as Bobby's got a wife and 3 kids.
Yeah.
And now he's been, basically ripped in half.
Yeah. Because I think that's something that I really like about, say, like the Alien and Aliens films is like you get these little moments to get a sense of the humanity of the other characters, like the main character being Ripley, obviously follow her story, but you get a sense of, sort of the other humans on board.
Unless you refuse to watch the third film with a 10-foot barge pole.
Yes.
Because I haven't seen it and I refuse to see it.
Fair enough. I've watched it. I've over the years, my opinion's changed as I
think it's like, you can't top the second one, really.
Yeah.
Although if I had to go with which one's the best, I probably would, although this is a bit controversial, go with the original.
Yeah, no, I would agree. The original is my favorite as well. So yeah, that's what I would like out of this story is, just a bit more interaction, because it does sort of mention how, they're all living on the same compound in cabins.
God, I almost said, they submarine. That would have been interesting.
So yeah, to get just a little bit of something, because I guess we get a little bit of like, his name was Frank sort of thing. But
although that's actually something I brought up during the recording of this, is like, why is he turning to Frank? Frank's dead.
Yeah, that was a good point as well. I sort of, as we were talking, sort of mentioned maybe it was for scientific purposes. Maybe he was, like doing an autopsy to try and get some information.
I was about to say, it's pretty obvious how he died. His face was mangled and he's got deep gashes in his chest.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure it was, I wouldn't say quite death by 1,000 cuts, but being shredded.
Yeah, being shredded.
That would be the quickest autopsy ever.
But I guess, if... it's
not like we need to know what the guy had for breakfast.
No, but I think as well, you have a supernatural being that has, shredded someone to pieces. Is there... has anything transferred from the supernatural being to the dead person, when it comes to... Because I guess, you're not really told of, like, how...
I'd lean towards no, but then I don't think I'd be sticking around to find out.
Yeah, well, I guess that's his job. That's kind of the thing. And it does seem like there's quite a deep amount of time that passes, at least from what I kind of pulled from it, is that it seemed, from the point of the security team going in, the sort of action sequence that happens, them coming back with the dead body, from that point to then, everything growing in intensity, it feels like there's quite a bit of time in there where everyone is just sort of like trying to keep busy because the tension is building. It doesn't say how long.
I was about to say, why even bother dragging back Frank's body?
Yeah.
I would have just left it there.
I guess, it does seem like the security team as well are friendly with each other. So it's sort of like, well, how long do they go back? What's their history? Are they sort of brothers in arms?
I could understand them dragging back the guy who's barely alive, but why waste time dragging back someone who's already dead, which might risk while the guy who's barely alive while kicking it on their way back?
I did think that was weird as well. Yeah, if the other guy...
I wonder if the author actually mistook the injured guy for Frank, who was the dead guy. That could have been a possibility, because I'm pretty sure Frank was the guy who got murked by the thing.
That's what I thought as well. I thought, Frank's the dead one.
You want to quickly just, again, pull up Find and see.
Yeah.
We'll use the Find tool because it took us a bit long to flick through it. Because I'm pretty sure Frank was the one that got, annihilated by the creature.
Dead man's name was Frank. He was buried outside in the cold Alaskan ground.
And I guess let's go and check the other mentions.
At least. Apparently, subject 1 leaped out at
Frank after the door had opened.
Yeah.
And then the last one will be talking about treating him.
I spent most of the time in the firm attending to Frank in the control room. Maybe this third mention of Frank was a mistake. And it wasn't meant to be Frank. Maybe he at some point changed the name. Maybe it wasn't Frank that died. It was Frank that just got injured and was the one that sort of got his got slashed up a bit and his eye gouged out,
which that would have had to hurt.
Yes, and the fact that he just wanders back with them with his eye gouged out, like that's I thought that was a little bit off. Like, you would think they would have.
I think that would throw off your. I wouldn't say it would throw off your balance having your eye gouged out, but it'd make it hard to navigate.
Yeah, it definitely would.
Like, don't get me wrong, over time you'd compensate for it, but still, immediately having your eye gouged out, you're going to have a hard time with depth perception.
Oh, yeah. And he's slashed up as well, so I'm assuming he's probably, sort of holding those parts that are also hurt as well, and maybe he's limping a bit. So, the fact that they kind of just let him make his way back, or at least that's what it seems like. It was a little bit off as well.
I'm pretty sure they did drag the dead guy back, which,
Yeah.
If anything, I feel like the guy who got, his eyes gouged out and slashed up pretty good would probably need to be dragged back.
Yeah, I'm surprised that, the third security guy isn't being carried back.
Because I think it would be a pain in the ass to try and carry 2 people back when you've got a 4-man team.
Yeah. I'm just curious. I want to check out what the lyrics are for Living in the Sunlight, just to see if there is any depth to the meaning or, why it's being used. Maybe it's just sort of the contrast of the song as well.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, it seems like this is not too bad of a song. It seems like a pretty short one too.
It is, yeah. It does, yeah. I guess it kind of feels like, the contrast, sort of like what you get in, the Guardians of the Galaxy films where, they a lot of the time they use these nice, lighthearted, fun songs in these big action sequences. But I guess in this sense, it is
more for juxtaposition.
Yeah, and you get the creepy factor of like all this weird stuff happening, but then this really bright, fun song.
God, imagine hearing that song as you see people get ripped apart.
Yeah.
God, that would be an awesome scene in a film. Just such bright, happy music just being heard as people are just getting shredded. Yeah. Now I want to see a short film just for that scene alone.
Yes.
I wonder if someone's actually made a short film of this. There has to be. If they did Russian Sleep as a short film, and I think there was a film too done on it, but I'm not sure if this is well known as Russian Sleep.
I think, I guess that is a good point because I think there's much more to work with. There's also like many similarities between the two as well. So it kind of would make sense that this would have, some sort of adaptation. But as you're sort of saying, is this as popular or well known? Maybe not. So,
although I guess it'd be kind of a bit of a pain to try and shoot because, you've heard what the underground complex is described like, and I think it would be hard to find something that would kind of fit its description.
Yeah, maze.
But I guess soundstage.
Soundstage, yeah, good. I guess it depends on the perspective it's being shot from as well, and you can always sort of shoot the same room or the same hallway from a different angle and make it seem like it is completely different.
Although, God, if we had the money to do it, I wouldn't mind actually doing like a short film of it. Although saying that I got no film experience, so it's going to be absolute dog shit.
Yeah, I guess it always the first time doing something new, it's always going to be a little bit rough.
I just keep doing it over and over again until I get it to perfection. So it'd be like version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4, version 5, etc.
I think
isn't there someone who's done that with films? I'd say George Lucas. Like, how many times has he remastered like some of the old Star Wars films?
Yeah. Well, I guess he can't now because, he doesn't own it. But he did quite a few remastered versions, and every time some sort of new technology would come about, he would redo it and format it for that technology.
Well, I guess on that topic, we should wrap this up. Because,
think so.
I think we've said most of what we wanted to say about the story, so we might as well give it a quick rating before, we end this video off, considering that, I think we probably only spent as long talking about it as we have, I've spent narrating it. Although I guess, again, what do you rate it?
I think I'm probably going to go a really solid 8 out of 10 for this one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'll say, as a creepypasta, I think I'd give it a 9, but as I would rate it, I'd give it an 8.5.
Okay. Cool.
As it's a pretty solid creepypasta. And even today, it still holds up pretty well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think this is one of the ones that we both have rated pretty highly.
Definitely has been, yeah. I would say, yeah, it definitely holds up quite well. I really like, the way that you sort of break it up into, so as a creepypasta and then as just a standalone, because, I think it does really well on both fronts.
Although there is a little quick quirk to the way I rate things.
Yeah.
Tends basically on my scale unattainium.
Yes.
So something like a 9 means that it's really, really, really good.
Yeah.
As I believe that nothing can be ever truly perfect.
Yeah, that's fair. There is
so something like a 9.5 is basically god tier.
Yeah, okay.
So again, me giving it a 9 as a creepypasta just means that, in my opinion, it kind of stands above the rest, especially around its time.
Cool.
Like, it's like any other creepypasta. It has a few problems, but I feel like its strengths quite outweigh a lot of its drawbacks, unlike some of the other creepypastas that are pretty strong but can't quite, overcome their drawbacks.
Yeah. I think that's probably a really good point that I would make as well. Yeah, this one, exactly what you just said. Yeah, I would absolutely agree that this one, its drawbacks, you can get past and still enjoy it. Whereas, some of the others we've covered, not quite. So yeah, pretty cool. I did like this one.
Saying that like 5's average, so anything over 5 would be, basically above average.
I guess, anything, above 5 is readable sort of thing, with some level of enjoyment.
Although, I guess we're going to have to wait until see what you're covering next.
Yeah.
Although, actually, now getting this out of the way, I'm not quite sure what I'm going to cover next.
Yeah, because this one's been on your list for
actually, I think since we started doing these. Pretty
much. So, yeah, I have no idea what I'm going to cover, so I'm definitely open to suggestions. And
although there's 2 that I'm currently thinking of doing. I'm either doing Laughing Jack or Eyeless Jack. One of the Jacks.
One of the Jacks, or both of the Jacks.
Although hopefully not Uncle Jack.
Fair enough. So, I guess with all that out of the way, let us know what are your guys' thoughts on the Harbinger Experiment. Where does it rate for you on your scale? Was there anything that we missed that we should have covered more? And I guess leave a like, share us around, because that really helps.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Not only that, but if there's a creepypasta that you would like us to cover, let us know down in the comments below. Yeah, a creepypasta that you would like us to cover, because, maybe if we feel like it, or if we're kind of struggling to think of a creepypasta to do that day, we'll probably get around to covering it.
Yeah, absolutely.
If it's a really good suggestion, it'll probably be the next episode.
Yeah, and I guess we'll catch you in the next one.
Yep, see ya.